So you go by J. Jeffrey Messerole in your professional life, but your legal name is Jordan.
Jordan, that's what the J stands for.
Okay. Jordan, you've been living in Des Moines for a couple of years now. You actually moved there in June of 2020.
Yeah, sort of. I guess if you can call it mid-pandemic, it was right smack dab in the middle of it for the most part, and made for an interesting time to buy a house, an interesting time to move. But we moved there June of 2020.
Before that, you were living in Spirit Lake, which is where you grew up, and you actually lived in Western Iowa for most of your life.
Yeah.
What was it like working as a musician in Western Iowa?
I didn't really start playing music until I was in band in middle school, things like that. But I didn't really pick up a guitar until I was in my early 20s and started writing at about the same time, writing songs at about the same time. And when I came back to Northwest Iowa after that, it was kind of like being on an island. There's very, very few original songwriters in the whole entire western half of the state. Andy Jewell is really the only one that comes to mind right off the top of my head for the whole entire western half. And there's all kinds of musicians, of course, but it's a lot of cover bands and stuff like that. The Iowa Great Lakes is known as kind of that party destination, so there's a lot of bars that want a lot of bands that are playing familiar stuff. So it was kind of like being on an island by myself out there because there wasn't a lot of other original creatives that were making songs themselves, but just a lot of people replaying those cover songs.
Have you mostly been a solo artist for your musical career?
I have. In various places where I've lived, I've had a band that's backed me up, and I had the Stone Horses that worked with me when I lived in Western Iowa in a small town called Cherokee, and then a couple guys that we called Fire Creek that backed me up when I lived in Northwest Iowa. And now that I'm in Des Moines, it seems like there's a lot more people to choose from to back me up, but it seems like everybody's already in a band or multiple bands, and so it's kind of hard coming in from the outside so late in the game to really wrangle a group of players that could commit time to doing it. So it's been a lot of solo work.
A lot of your songs, to me at least, come across as stories, or at least there is a story behind them. And I'm not going to ask you to confirm or deny any specific details, but is any of that you, or is it people you know, or where do these stories come from?
It's dependent on the song. Every single song's got a different kind of origin. I would like to say that I really am living through my music, but very few of my songs are actually based on me or a real event in my life. I joke often that I have a pretty milquetoast life. It's been, a middle-class white guy from the Midwest with not a lot of issues or struggles or anything like that. So I don't have a lot to complain about or many stories to tell outside of, fun family vacations or how great my wedding went. So it's not, there's not a lot of great material for songs there, but just through a lot of stories that I hear and media that I, ingest, that's where I come up with a lot more of my stuff.
What are some examples of some of that media that you're talking about there?
Sure. Well, Henrietta, Queen of the Highway has become kind of a set ender, show ender for me. People seem to like that song pretty well. And it's actually kind of loosely based on the life and times of Eileen Wuornos. She was America's first serial killer, first female serial killer. And the movie Monster with Charlize Theron is the story of Eileen Wuornos. And so I took kind of her story and made a few minor changes to reflect a similar kind of person as Eileen Wuornos. And so, that kind of true crime element comes into play in the song Buckskin Jacket as well. There was a new documentary out on HBO Max about a guy from Illinois who had been charged with killing 3 women who were at a state park, and their only real evidence was that he had a buckskin jacket. And then after hearing that word, it just kind of struck me as something unique and something interesting, so I just made a song based around that.
Sounds like you have a bit of an affinity for any sort of true crime story, whether it's a movie or a podcast, maybe. Yeah,
I spend way too much time listening to and watching true crime stuff. I mean, podcasts all over the place. And documentaries as much as I can. And I'll take naps and I'll turn on Forensic Files and have that play in the background while I take a nap, which is a weird way to get stuff into your mind.
You did release a new EP earlier this year. You've had a few releases. This new one is called the Strange Bird Tapes.
Yeah.
And my first question about it is there actual tape involved?
On this one in particular, there is. Yeah,
Okay.
I got hooked up with a guy named Travis Atkinson who lives down in Centerville, Iowa, and he has the Strange Bird Studios, and so that's where the Strange Bird names come from. And we recorded everything on old vintage reel-to-reel equipment that he had gotten out of various studios in Nashville and is refurbished and got into working order. And the tape that we recorded on came from the Warner Brothers studio in Nashville that after it closed, he bought up a whole bunch of blank tape from them and all that. So it was legitimately recorded to tape, this one.
Was that important to you?
It was for this experience. I think right now that EP is going to be about half of the next record. I don't have a release date for that or anything, but they'll be about half of the next record. And I think that these songs are probably the best that I've ever written in the 12, 15 years I've been writing songs. And so I wanted to have a solo recording to start sharing this stuff and start making people aware of what I've got happening. But I also wanted an interesting quality behind how it's recorded, because I can do all kinds of recording in my home studio and it just sounds like a lo-fi bad recording. And having this kind of interesting tape element that gives it a little bit more of a vintage feel, or to make it sound like it comes off a vinyl record, was just a super unique experience and something that I really wanted to share.
When I was listening to the EP, a couple of themes jumped out at me. You sing a lot about driving and also weather.
Yeah.
Does that come from, you are being a musician, you're driving, excuse me, being a musician, you're driving all the time and dealing with all kinds of weather, especially in Iowa. For the record, we are recording this in early May and it's cold and rainy outside. So does that just kind of, was that a choice? Did it just work its way in?
It wasn't anything it wasn't a choice. It's just, the month of April, I put about roughly 4,000 miles on my car. So that's quite a bit for, a standard vehicle. And so I spend a lot of time on the road. I mean, hours a day, almost every single day. And weather directly impacts the driving and the driving conditions, but it's also just something that I think everybody processes and thinks about, and so it's sort of an easy conversation topic. And so, those are two very common themes because they're things that I come across and interact with and do almost every single day.
You talk about telling other people's stories, and one song that jumped out to me was Stock in Trade, which has a line in the chorus that I just love. We need the truck for work the next day.
Yeah.
And that's just to me, that's such a brilliant thing to write a whole song around. Do you kind of look for little mundane things to write songs around?
I do. I think a lot of what I try to write about, for the most part, and I know we just reflected on some specific topics, but I think broadly speaking, I try and write just about Midwestern life, kind of a very broad picture topic of just standard day-to-day normal things that people encounter, because that's going to be the most relatable to people, I think. And that's what's on my mind all the time. So that's what I generally like to write about.
There is another song on the EP called Cry for Me, where you come right out and talk about self-deprecation and ill-timed jokes.
Yeah.
And are you getting a little meta there?
Definitely. That one, as much as it isn't about me, there are some definite qualities in the narrator that are of mine that are reflected in the song. And that self-deprecation, if you've ever seen a live show, is, a constant component of what I've got going on. I like to make a lot of jokes, and also stand-up comedy is another thing that I love. And so that kind of finds its way into my performances and my songs as well.
What else have you got coming up? What are you excited about?
For sure. This year I've booked more than I've ever have before. I'm sitting at about 108 shows, and I've still got a couple months left to fill. So I'm hoping to be in the 130, 150 show range by the time the year is over. But this weekend, I'm especially excited about being able to open up a show at Codfish Hollow, which is kind of a really cool indie venue out in Maquoketa, Iowa, outside of Maquoketa. And it's a cool old Quonset hut on a family farm that they've cleared out. They've built up a stage, lights, the whole 9 yards. And then they have really, really great independent acts that are touring across the country that come in. And So myself and Catherine Severin Fox, who's a great fiddle player in the Des Moines area, she's going to join me on there. And then we're going to play ahead of Jeremy Pennell and his band and Miles Nielsen and the Rusted Hearts. And it's going to be a really great night of music in a venue that I've dreamed of playing ever since I started performing. And I'm just super excited about that one.
That covers all of my questions. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you would like to mention?
I mean, nothing necessarily. I'm pretty empty-headed, so.
What were your, let's say, top 5 true crime podcasts that you got into during the pandemic?
I tell you, Small Town Murder is a great one. That's one that my wife and I listen to on long road trips. Episodes are usually between 2 and 3 hours long, and it's 2 stand-up comedians that are retelling a story of pretty horrible crimes that occur in small towns, obviously, and their outlook on it and the way they tell the story make it a little bit more palatable, so you're not just getting the horrifying details constantly. There's some jokes in between and some rants and things like that, so it makes it a little bit lighter than a traditional one. But Criminal is another great one that's not just necessarily murder driven, but Phoebe Judge makes really great stories out of these really incredible, interesting crime things. Generation Y has some really good episodes as well. They're a little bit more fact-driven, a little bit more dry, but they cover a lot of great topics. Gosh, I can't think of. I'm sure there's others that I'm forgetting about, but those 3 are the main ones that I listen to on the road.
Did you develop any other new interests while you were stuck at home, not traveling, not playing shows?
Just a lot of writing. I've always liked to write, and so I've been working on a variety of different novels or novellas that I would like to work into a final product. But also just been actually trying to write some stand-up bits and things like that I may try out at some point in time. But it just gave me a lot of time to really focus on writing. And like I said, I think I'm writing the best stuff that I ever have. So it feels like that was my focus during that time, and it kind of paid off.
So when you're driving by yourself and, out on the open road, kind of in between towns and maybe even late at night, does it freak you out to be listening to true crime podcasts?
It doesn't. I mean, obviously they're horrifying stories that you hope never happen to you or to anyone, but that's just the way it goes. But the thing that is a little bit more calming or not so scary about it, I should say, is that it's interesting because it is such a unique situation that it's likely not to happen to anyone ever, let alone myself personally. Just so knowing how uncommon it is makes it less scary, but also scarier. I don't know.
I think that's our little tag for after at the end of the video. All right.
Great.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you.